So I know you mentioned at the press conference earlier this week that reducing gun violence is your top priority for the police department. Why is that?
Primarily because reducing gun violence saves lives. And if nothing else, the police department should be about building the perception of safety and saving lives.
I know you brought up quite a few different strategies or new initiatives that you want to employ to do that. There was a couple that stood out to me. The first one being the gun violence task force, or I don't know if that was the appropriate term, but what does that look like, especially you mentioned working with ATF?
Yeah, so with ATF, what I'm most interested in the conversations that we've just started having with ATF, and that's perhaps getting a NIBIN machine for Spokane, the only NIBIN machine in this side of Washington State is with the Washington State Patrol Crime Lab in Cheney. And for a city of this size that experiences the number of shootings that this city does, as well as regionally, including northern Idaho, I think it just makes sense for us to have our own NIBIN machine. And just to be clear, you know, NIBIN is an acronym that came up from the ATF, and it's the National Integrated Ballistic Information Network. And I can go more into detail on that, but it would significantly enhance our capability of solving violent gun crime.
So right now, does Spokane send all its ballistics evidence to the State Patrol Crime Lab then? It
does, and that there's problems with that, and it's not the fault of the crime lab or the Washington State Patrol. It's just an issue of capacity and how many requests they get and how much information they take in. A part of the effectiveness of NIBIN across the country is how fast cartridge casings can be entered into the system. To become a gun crime intelligence center, they have criteria that those cartridges need to be entered within 48 hours, which simply does not occur right now here in Eastern Washington.
So when we're talking about a NIBIN machine, are we talking about like one of the brass tracks machines?
Right, I think brass tracks refers to the old software on the machines, but yes, it's an actual physical machine that's operated by an analyst or a technician who spends their day entering and correlating and then generating those correlations. And it's based on some pretty well-established research that shows that a small number of offenders are responsible for the vast amount of shootings, so they start correlating these different cartridge casings from different crime scenes, and we can see almost like a link analysis all of the different shootings that this one gun, this one firearm has been involved in. So now the investigators have those leads, and they simply just need to find the person who had the gun in their hand.
So if SPD were to do its own ballistics analysis in-house, would that also mean getting a test firing chamber, or is that something you guys already have here?
That's something we already have. We do our own test fires, and then those test cartridges are sent to the Washington State Patrol.
So it's just getting that machine to actually analyze the cartridges in-house?
Yeah, it's very much a systems-based model, so getting the machine is the first start. And then getting the analyst to come in and do the work, and then developing a comprehensive system to ensure that those leads, and that it'll generate a number of different leads, are then farmed out to the individual investigators who have those cases, and then ensuring the accountability that those cases are being worked to the best of the ability of the investigators.
Yeah. And I know you also mentioned kind of a new strategy that you would want to employ, place network investigations. Is that the correct?
Place network investigations, yes. This is a relatively new strategy, and it also looks at chronic acute hotspots where gun violence has occurred, but a little bit differently than in the past. It analyzes these micro locations by the places that are in there, based on the idea that those places are networked. So offenders use those different places for different incidents. So sometimes there's a crime setting. So for example, there's a convenience store where all the crime occurs. But surrounding that are other locations that the offenders will go hide at. Those are called comfort spaces. Or there's auxiliary crime locations where they'll go that maybe facilitate the crime. They allow folks to use that to traffic drugs, or just that those places are all interconnected and networked. And if you disrupt the network, then you disrupt the crime that's occurring at the one spot. But you have to hit all of the different locations. What we found in the past is we just concentrate on the crime scene itself, where the crime is actually occurring. We're not addressing the other locations. So as soon as we're done and we move on to the next thing, the crime comes right back.
What would you identify as some of those hot spots in Spokane? I know with the core program, we're addressing the downtown core as kind of a crime hot spot. In terms of gun crimes, do we have any of these nexus locations?
Well, that would certainly be the first step, is doing that analysis. And that in that analysis, it basically is breaking down the city into small grids, and then determining what gun violence is occurring in each of the grids. I have yet to see a city where it's a very small geographic area that's responsible for the vast amount of gun violence, and that those hot spots will flare up on these grid maps very quickly, and then we make a determination on how we're going to approach those hot spots.
And I know you've called gun violence a social contagion, and you've reiterated several times that we see a small number of offenders that are responsible for a large percentage of the crime. Can you kind of break that down for me, what you mean about a social contagion, and kind of trying to track these offenders who are responsible for a lot of the crime?
Right. There's a large body of academic research that shows that people who surround a violent offender are at risk of being an offender themselves or being a victim of gun violence in the very near future. And that's what they mean by it's a social contagion. It travels along these relationships, once again, I'm going to use the term networks. So the people that are closest to the individual who's actually doing the shooting are the most at risk of being a victim or offender in the future. So it's identifying those folks so that you can intervene before a shooting actually occurs. The actual shooter, if you can prosecute them, then they get to go to jail. But it's the folks around them that are at risk that you want to intervene and prevent the next shooting that comes along, or prevent them from, quite frankly, from being a victim of a shooting, because that also is a component of this.
I know you also mentioned social network investigations as kind of part of this place network investigation. How would that work?
So that's exactly what I was just talking about. Social network analysis is based on the social contagion theory. And so what a lot of people mistake this for social media analysis, and it's not. It's social network. It's relationship based. So you're actually mapping out the relationships between people who are closest to a violent offender. So as I said, you can intervene to try and prevent the next shooting, and offer services, whatever it is they need, and try and make sure that there is no further gun violence in this small network. In previous iterations of that, we've seen where less than 1% of the shootings in one particular area, the vast majority of the shootings, so over 60%, were due to one small group of people who made up less than 1% of the population of that area. So that's just what I mean, is it's very contagious. If you're surrounded by violence, then you're very much at risk of being violent or being a victim of violence. And that's what social network analysis does, is try to identify those cells, and then you go in and disrupt those networks.
Okay, that's the mistake I was making about social media, so.
Very common. And when I say that, people always think of social media, but it's actually, and that's why I like to say you're mapping relationships, those networks that make up relationships.
Yeah. Does one of the strategies in the strategic plan focus on like setting up a new unit to kind of combat gun violence?
It does, so indirectly, but there's a model called tactical investigations, where you have at the street level a patrol-centric unit that immediately responds to violent incidents, particularly gun violence. They immediately take action to identify witnesses, to identify potential suspects, to secure the scene so that evidence isn't lost long before the first detective ever gets out there. They would have enhanced training, almost like detective light, so to speak. But then they can immediately start following up on leads before detectives ever arrive. And in my previous city, we established this, and we found multiple occasions where that small unit was identifying suspects and making arrests before the first homicide or shooting detective ever arrived on scene. And a lot of it was because they're out on the street, they know who a lot of the players are, they know nicknames, they know tattoos, they know physical descriptions, whereas a lot of the detectives haven't been out on the street in a long time. But if they're out in the street, they're patrol-centric, and they're working these areas constantly, they're going to know who these folks are, and they're going to be able to identify them very quickly.
I know this was brought up at the press conference, but obviously Spokane Police is not alone in dealing with staffing issues. It's a statewide problem. And then as a city, we're dealing with some budget issues. How do you start all these new initiatives and new patrol units when you have to factor in budget and staffing? Right.
So that is the challenge of every chief across the country, as well as my executive staff, is prioritizing it. It's deciding what's most important and what's going to have the biggest impact on the community. And I go back to where we started: it's saving lives. And in most cases with gun violence, it's saving young lives. These are primarily young people who are getting harmed or doing the harm. And so we want to intervene at that level to save lives. So I have to prioritize that. But we're also looking at efficiencies, different business modeling that can save us money, and do things maybe a little bit smarter without as much staff. But it is entirely possible that some responsibilities and tasks that we've done in the past, we will no longer do. And those are the tough decisions that myself and my executive staff have to make moving forward.
Are you guys working on those right now?
Absolutely.
So it could be that we have to kind of, I think a word that was used before was triage, but redirect some resources.
Redirect some resources to save human lives.
Do you know how soon, I know you've been talking with the ATF about the NIBIN machine, do you know how soon we could see any of these strategies or new patrols implemented?
I don't. There are things such as hot spotting that we can do pretty quickly, and Spokane PD is already engaged in that to some degree. Other things are going to be longer term, and they're going to take longer to stand up and then to sustain. So, as I mentioned before, there's no one solution, there's no silver bullet to these social issues, but if we employ a multitude of strategies, both short-term, mid-term, and long-term, and get those stood up and sustain those, I think we're going to have a very large and significant impact in this area.
And I know the goal is to reduce these violent gun crimes by 10% by the end of the year.
Yes, yes. And some people have said, well, 10% doesn't sound like very much, but it is. 10% is a significant statistical mark and goal that we're looking for.
Yeah. Anything else that you can think to add, or anything you wanted to hit on that we didn't talk about?
No.